Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. My name's Danny Madrone. I serve on the Olympia City Council, and I'm really glad to see you all here to learn about our rental housing registry program. This is something that's actually in place in over a dozen cities across Washington. So not something new in terms of a concept, but new for our community. So I'm glad you're really here to learn about how it's being implemented. The goals of this program are to ensure basic health and safety for tenants, preserve the housing that we have in our community, support landlords by sharing information and resources, and to gather data about housing trends so that we can better support the needs of our community. And this evening is about implementation of the program. So not about the merits of the program itself, but what will be expected of you as landlords as we roll the program out and pull it all together. And so with that, I'd like to introduce Krista Lenson, who's going to lead us through it.
Thank you. So thanks for joining us this evening. As I mentioned before, this is a hybrid meeting. We do have some folks who live out of state, so they'll be joining for the presentation portion of the night, but we'll also have time afterwards for more interactive opportunities. And so unfortunately, they can't join us for that part, but for those of you in person, we'll be having some opportunities to talk with staff or provide some input. So if you want to stick around for that part, hopefully that will be of use to you. I also wanted to mention that there were some folks who specifically wanted to come tonight just to get some help walking through the registry process. And so if you've already heard the webinar, you kind of know what's going on, you just want to get started on signing up, Cora Carson is available in the back of the room, and she and Woody will be available upstairs on the second floor. If at any point you want to join them and start the registration process, they'll be on the second floor, so there is an elevator in the lobby, as well as 2 flights of stairs. So as you prefer to go up the stairs or the elevator. And then, so first of all, I'll present some information, just an overview of the registry and the business licensing requirements. And then we have a guest presenter, Sean Moore from the Thurston Economic Development Council, who will talk a little bit more about business structures and licensing. And then after that, you'll have kind of your own time to either ask questions, provide input, or get help with the registry process. Okay, so I'm gonna go through our slides here. All right. And if at any point you can't hear me, please just raise a hand so that I can be sure to move closer to the mic or speak up a little bit. Yes. Okay. So what led us here, some of the things that have informed our work at the city are the city has a housing action plan that they implemented starting in 2021. Some of those things involve making it easier for tenants to stay in their homes and to access housing. That kicked off some renter protections, community engagement that we did in 2021 and 2022, where we had online survey opportunities, focus groups with landlords and tenants, and one-on-one conversations and interviews with landlords and tenants that we've continued to have over the last couple of years. We also went through an assessment of fair housing process in 2022 and 2023 for our community. And so we heard a lot of feedback from folks in the community about their challenges with housing, and especially on housing and health concerns, particularly for tenants with disabilities in our community. And through this council committee process, we had the Land Use and Environment Committee and council study sessions on this issue where we talked about what are some of the other cities in Washington State and around the country doing to address this issue, and what can we learn from what they have done. So all of this work led up to the council passing the ordinance that established these requirements in November of 2023. So just to give a broad overview of the program requirements, so the rental registry program requires that landlords register their properties annually with the city, obtain a business license, and then in the future undergo inspections periodically. I just want to note right away that these properties, this requirement only applies to properties that are in Olympia's city limits. So we've talked with a lot of folks and gotten a lot of questions because a lot of people have properties with an Olympia address, but then come to find out they're not actually in Olympia city limits. So if you are not sure, we can double check that for you and help you out with that. So rental housing owners will be required to register annually. And then the inspection process won't start until 2025. Since this is really a new program and we know this is a lot of new information for folks to take in, we're really focused on just providing education and outreach and helping folks through the process for the next several months. We're not going to be putting any energy towards enforcing these requirements over these next few months. So there are some property types that I also want to note that are exempt from these requirements. So those include owner-occupied manufactured homes, short-term or vacation rentals, which require a separate kind of permit, transitional housing, group homes, assisted living, or other kinds of living arrangements that aren't covered by landlord-tenant law. And staff is in the process of bringing some language to council that would exempt property owners who are renting to an immediate family member. So if that applies to you also, please do talk to us afterwards so that we can keep you in the loop about that. Okay, so as of March 1st, the rental registry has been open. We've had folks working through that process, and we've been working one-on-one with people to try to get their properties registered. We know this is a new process, so we're just trying to help everyone to the best of our ability to get their property registered. The property registration is by each property. So it's, if you have a duplex, that's one property. If you have a 4-unit building, that's one property. But then the fees are assessed based on the number of units that you enter. So if it's one building and you have 12 units, you say there's 12 units in there, it will automatically calculate the fee for that property. We do also have a process for affordable housing providers to request a fee waiver. So that's housing providers who have a contract or a deed restriction or something to that effect that would be determining whether they provide affordable housing. So in our code language, it says that every person who makes a unit available for rent is required to obtain a business license. So the property owner would need to still register even if they have a property management company. We've gotten a lot of questions about how this interacts with property management. So a property owner could ask their management company to register their unit for them, but they would just need to make sure that their property management company has all of the information that would be necessary to complete that registry process. So one of the things that it includes is a spreadsheet with the unit rents and the unit sizes. So like a 2-bedroom, 1-bath, or, depending what the size of the unit is. A property owner who only has one rental unit on the same property where they live, that could be an ADU, or if they live in one half of a duplex and rent out the other side, they would only be required to do the city registry process. They would not be required to obtain a business license, or undergo the inspection process. If we find in the future that there's some serious issues with the property, that there's code violations, we might, revisit that inspection requirement for those properties. So as this program gets up and running, we're really open to hearing your feedback. We know that there have been some hiccups with folks who have been trying to utilize the online system and finding it tricky. And so we're trying our best to be responsive and to meet needs and requests as we're able to. Okay. So the business license requirement also went into effect on March 1st. Through the City of Olympia, our business licensing is through the Washington State Department of Revenue. And then we just have an addendum for adding an endorsement to do business in city limits. And so that application process is on the Department of Revenue webpage. They also have a paper application that can be submitted as well. For our city endorsement, that is a $30 annual fee, and nonprofits are exempted from that fee. And one license can cover multiple rental properties. So if you have multiple rental properties in the city of Olympia, you could just use one business license to cover those. One thing I want to note, because this has scared a few people, the long-term rental housing is exempt from state and city business and occupation taxes. So property owners can request what's called an active non-reporting status with the Department of Revenue, which basically means that you're doing business as a rental property owner, but you're not required to file tax returns like another type of business that would be subject to that kind of taxation. I tell people this up front because we had a couple people receive a letter from Department of Revenue that was automatically generated that said that they needed to file tax returns for the last 6 years that they were operating their rental property. And so there is no additional tax, but you do need to reach out to Department of Revenue in order to just not keep receiving those letters. And we do have some contact information for Department of Revenue as well as our city staff here for you tonight. And Sean will cover more information about business structures and licenses in his presentation. Yep. So as I mentioned earlier, inspection requirements are not going to take effect until 2025. The intent is that proactive inspections will help just establish reasonable baselines for rental properties to ensure life safety. Many other cities in Washington and nationwide have implemented similar programs to try to mitigate issues that are unreported by tenants, and to create some basic standards for protecting safety and preserving housing stock. Properties will be required to complete an inspection once every 5 years, and property owners will be notified of the year that their inspection is due. So because it's a 5-year cycle, your first inspection could take place anytime between 2025 and 2029. New construction will not be required to complete inspections for the first 10 years of occupancy. And affordable housing providers that already have to complete inspections as a HUD requirement are able to submit alternative inspection reports. Or if you're a private landlord who has a tenant with a housing choice voucher and your unit has already been inspected by the housing authority, you can also submit that most recent inspection. So for when property owners are notified of the year their inspection is due, a percentage of the units at each site will be selected by the city. So it won't be 100% of the units on the site. It'll be a random selection. The property owner will select an inspector from a list of city certified inspectors, and then they'll schedule and work directly with that inspector. The property owners will then provide a 30 to 60-day notice to the tenants of that scheduled inspection. And then an inspection checklist will be utilized by that inspector on a pass-fail basis. So we've provided a copy of a draft checklist tonight so that you can see kind of what other cities have implemented and what the scope of that is. And also, if you have any specific concerns or if there's parts that are worrying you as you read through that checklist, you can also provide feedback on the areas of concern that you have. Since we're still working to develop that program and it won't take effect until 2025, we're still open to receiving feedback and hearing about, how we can improve upon that process. If the property passes the inspection, then the city would issue a certificate of compliance that would be good for 5 years. And then if the unit fails the inspection, the property owner would either have 30 days to remedy the issues or contact the city and we would enter into an agreement to fix the issues identified. So for example, if you're trying to get the repairs completed, but you're struggling to find a contractor, and it's not an immediate, life safety issue, we can work with you and just come up with a reasonable timeline. So as long as property owners are staying in communication with the city, that's really what we're looking for. The passing inspection is required, however, to renew the property business license. Okay. All right, and then associated with the ordinance that was passed by council, there were some additional protections provided. And so landlords are prohibited from passing on the registration license fee or inspection fee directly to the tenant. Landlords may not increase the rent if the unit doesn't pass inspection or if they don't complete the inspection requirement. And tenants are protected from retaliation for asserting their rights under these measures. So really, staff is focused on providing education and outreach. We want to encourage voluntary compliance as much as possible. So if we do, hear about an issue, we will contact you first and try to talk with you before starting an enforcement process. Okay. All right, so yes, that's a great question. So the fees for the inspections will be set by the inspectors. So they'll be like a private contractor in this case. So that will be set, the rates will be set by the inspectors themselves. When we were developing this process, we talked with inspectors who are doing similar work in King County and Pierce County and gathered some initial information just to get a sense of what rates they were charging. So I have just some baseline information that I can provide about what was charged in other areas. Whether that's going to be similar or not will be somewhat based upon, who's working in Thurston County. Yeah. Yeah, so for multifamily properties where, they'd be coming out to inspect, multiple properties, that was in the range of 25 to 35 per unit. But for smaller properties, it's a little higher rate. Mhm. That was the rates that some of the King County inspectors. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, so this process will differ slightly from an overall home inspection in that there's a checklist that they'll follow. It's a pass or fail. They can note any issues that are needing to be remedied, but it's not to the full scale and scope of a home inspection. So the inspectors will need to have certain certifications. So one of them is that they could be a licensed home inspector, but they will need to have a basic qualification. So we'll need to know that they are, they have a qualification that would allow them to inspect the unit. And then we'll do a training with anyone who's interested in being on the city's list of inspectors, so that, we train them just on the process and what's required in the checklist and how they'll submit those inspection reports.
Is there any review board on
Mhm.
the accuracy or the opinion of the inspector?
So there is an appeals process that the property owner can file for if they disagree with the results of the inspection report. Okay.
I am so pleased that Olympia is spending so much time on those people that have a place to live as opposed to those that do not.
Sorry. So they might charge you a reinspection fee if they're coming back out for their time. Okay, I'm gonna move forward real quick and then we'll save some more questions for the end. Okay, so we also have an email listserv if you'd like to just keep updated on any changes with the program, or new information. So as we develop the inspection requirements further, if there's any further funding opportunities or things like that that we have to share from the city, as well as renewal reminders, you can sign up to get those email updates. The inspector. Mhm. Okay. So your feedback is helpful as we start this new program. Already in the first few weeks, we've adjusted some things in the registry portal to try to make it easier for folks. We've had some people come in and meet with us one-on-one to go through that process. And so your feedback really helps us to improve and to learn and to do better. So we welcome you to provide that feedback to us, to make sure that we're meeting your needs. And meeting the community's needs as well, from what we've heard. So there's also an opportunity tonight to provide some feedback, and I'll explain that a little bit more after the presentations this evening. And we've already gotten a little bit into questions, but we do have a few minutes to do some questions before Sean provides the next presentation. Yes. Mhm. Mhm. Correct. Yeah, so I'll just repeat the question just because we have some folks online too. So the first part of your question was, for single family homes, are there accessibility requirements such as a wheelchair ramp? So there's not, and we'll be looking, with single family homes, we know there's a gambit of homes that were built in 1930 versus homes that were built in 2020. We're not going to be holding a home that was built 100 years ago to the code standards of homes built today. So we're really looking at, life safety issues, making sure the property's in good repair and is safe for the tenants who are residing there. And then your second question was about Section 8. So if you do have a tenant with a voucher that's issued by the housing authority, then you would already have to complete an inspection of that property. That's a requirement of the housing authority before a tenant lives there. And they have staff who do those inspections for them on a regular basis. So if that does apply to your situation, you can submit that inspection instead of being required to do the third-party inspection. Yeah. They do, yes. It's quite comprehensive. It's called Inspire. I don't remember what it stands for. It's an acronym. It's NSPIRE. But that one is quite comprehensive, and they look at a lot of the same factors, but it's a little bit more in depth. Yes.
You do this house inspection, who pay for? Landlord pay for?
Correct. Yeah.
And what? City looking for more revenue?
So it's the idea of the inspection is to. Mhm.
Regulation. And when you put in that time of the inspection, then obviously it cannot come up of daily inspection pass. So harassed by city inspection, they want more money. They done similar to, for 30, for Houston County septic tank. Oh, we're gonna yearly inspection. And they get the money. Anything problem, septic or building, only will maintain. But you put into city control for little people, it's a bad inflation. But you put into limited, non-inclusive, that is the communist style. That's what you do right now. I live in the communist country, I know. And then Gil tried to flee from America, is to get changing. City, like you are, inspecting all kinds of the name for, so get the more revenue money. I've been landlord for 58 years. Never see happening except health department, Houston County. Septic inspection, we want the money, annual pay. Take it into the septic and then see how much it's floating and that kind of stuff. This is the way Olympia. Control for little people, how working the landlord. You don't see the how outside tenant try to freeloading and not pay the rent. That's bad enough. Inflation bad enough. They put that kind of system, it is the communist coming. All communists already there like you guys do.
So the intent of the inspections is not to produce revenue for the city. We won't be paid by the inspection costs. We're just trying to ensure that there is a basic level of life safety in the rental units that are provided. And in some other cities in the country, they've seen decreases in fires that have happened in residential properties. And it's helped, I've heard from staff at the city of Seattle that there were landlords who weren't aware of some of the issues that were needing repair because the tenant didn't report them. And then they found out that, oh, there was a leak that needed to be addressed, and they were able to address it before it snowballed into a bigger repair that needed to be made. Yeah, right now we don't have a good measure of what, average rents are for the whole spectrum of rental units in our community. We can get some ballparks from, places like Zillow or CoStar, but a lot of properties are not kind of captured in that information. And so it's helpful for us to know, what are some of the average rents? What are some of the smaller landlords charging compared to a larger corporate landlord? Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, part of the city's job is we are required by the state to plan for housing that's affordable to all different income levels of the community. That's our requirement under Growth Management Act regulations. And so we need to have some kind of baseline to be able to assess how we're doing and where we need to target our efforts in the future. So anything, we can release things with anyone who submits a public records request. What's that? Mhm. Yeah, we've heard concerns on both sides, people who don't want it to be disclosed at all and people who want it to be readily available. So we'll try to balance those concerns the best we can. Mhm.
I'm going to factor in what it costs. I'm going to set my rate accordingly. So I think that I'm going to say, or just pull it up. Or just pull it up. But anybody who's going to be in, yeah, it's just exactly the same. Here's what I think is going to happen. You more. If you want this data from me, the data. And we are going to manage our rent, think prices. So this notion of affordable rents is probably so that's my comment. And I'm going to push hard that if you want my data, stimulate, only fair, and so we can, as business people,
Yeah, and I think, part of this being a new program is we'll work on setting some measures to track over time so that we can see, what changes are made in the community. And so that we can see, how many properties are not meeting inspections, how many properties do we really need to put forth some additional effort to? Where do we need to support more of these property owners who are struggling to keep the properties up to the standards in the inspection?
It's a question about why would we need to get a business license on just one property? I don't consider it a business. I'm renting it rather than selling the home because I feel like by renting it, I'm the property that instead, I work with the management that was yearly inspection properties in the HOA that's governed, that's monitored monthly. They monitor the exterior, the landscaping, all of that stuff. So I'm already being monitored different ways, and I don't understand why me as a single unit landlord needs a business license where this is not where I mean, I barely made $1,000 this year out of the rental property after everything was said and done.
Mhm. Yeah, so sorry, I keep forgetting to repeat questions for the folks online. So the question, yeah. The question is, if you have one property, not seeing it as a business where you're earning an income off of that rental property. And, I have to say there's been, it's been in our code, in the city code, that anyone who is leasing or renting out property is conducting business in the city. So that's not a new thing. But I think there's been a lot of confusion in the community about whether or not that applies to landlords, because they're not subject to the B&O tax like other businesses are. So the city council wanted to just make it really clear that, renting out property is considered a business activity. I'm not sure who was next here, but in front here.
Tacoma and you said Pierce County and King County both have a program similar to this. Have there been an increase in the homeless population since this has taken place?
I don't know that I can correlate those two things. Yeah, I couldn't speak to that.
I have one question. If I bought and, I spent more money, I haven't paid money for 2 years now on my rental property, because I've maintained same tenant for 40 years. Now you tell me I gotta get a business license, will you up my taxes, lower my taxes, because I'm not making profit on my business?
Yeah, business and occupation tax is not collected from rental properties. So you're not going to be taxed at a higher rate for having a business. For a property tax. Is that- mhm.
Can I get a deduction?
You have an asset that's appreciating in value, and so, property. Mhm.
And
Mhm.
inflation is raising by 190,000, that's down for 300,000 in 2 years. I can't get that back. I've got a renter living in there, holding, control over $300,000 that I can't sell. You could lose your renting market.
Okay, is there someone in the back here? Mhm. Mhm.
But you're not.
No, not at the state. Yeah. I don't know what the state will decide. It's not something that the city does not charge B&O tax. I don't know. We would go based on probably what the state would decide on that. Yes.
Well, I'd say, if people think that landlords are all people who are hard to hold, who will always put the well-being of the tenant first and make sure that they're not renting substandard homes just because they can fill it themselves. We've had a very different experience. When I go back before there wasn't, there were a lot of households, people who own the houses, professors, who have good way to complain about taxes, but the city of Olympia doesn't control what the Department of Revenue charges. And they tax those that. All I can say is, if you do business, I'm not going to the cost we run, if you feel like the cost we get out of the business.
Thanks. So I think in the interest of time, we're going to move on because we do have another presentation. We're going to be available as staff to talk with people individually if you do have more questions tonight. So I'm going to pass it over once I get my screen ready here. Okay. So now we're gonna transition to having a brief presentation from the Thurston Economic Development Council. They've been kind enough to share information and resources. They are a resource in our community for small businesses. And so I'm just grateful to have Sean Moore here to share some information with you all tonight. Thanks, Sean.
Welcome. Good evening, everyone. And I wish we were meeting on more pleasant terms, but this is what we're at. So thank you for having me tonight. So my name is Sean Moore. I'm the director of the Center for Business and Innovation, and I oversee all the small business resources at the Economic Development Council. And we help people start businesses and grow businesses. What we're going to talk a little bit about today is just basic ideas about structuring and licensing your business, and some of the things that you have to go through process-wise to be able to do that. So basically, when you structure and license your business, you're creating a legal entity in the eyes of the federal government, the state government, and the city governments. And there's a lot of different factors to consider when you're thinking about choosing a structure for your business. The most common structures that we see start through the Center for Business and Innovation and we also have a women's business center and a small business development center, are sole proprietorships, partnerships, limited liability companies or LLCs, corporations, and nonprofit organizations. I think the 3 or 4 structures that would probably be the most appropriate for your scenarios are sole proprietorships, partnerships if you have a joint ownership of a house, or limited liability companies or corporations. First thing that will distinguish these different types of structures are your liability. And so if a tenant is in your home and slips and falls and somehow can put that on you, then you may have liability as an individual. And so if you select a sole proprietorship or a partnership, you have what's called unlimited liability. And that means that basically the business assets and your personal assets are not divided. They're the same. Yeah. And so if someone sues you, they can not only sue you for your business assets, but they can also sue you for your personal assets. And so in that situation, that's not a good scenario, right? And so the majority of people that we see start businesses through the Center for Business and Innovation choose limited liability companies. And the reason they do that is because it provides limited liability. And so in the case of a lawsuit, essentially the limited liability puts a second line of defense between your personal assets and your business assets. And so that means that if a lawsuit does occur, it can only be targeted at the assets of the business. And so it gives you that, protection. Of course, you have insurance ahead of that. That's your first, defense, but then your second defense is the limited liability structure. And so there are other factors here. If you choose a corporation, that's also a limited liability company, but there's some things to think about when you're actually forming this thing, right? And so, sorry, this thing's kind of a little Weird. And so if you're starting a sole proprietorship or a partnership, literally all you have to do is go to the Department of Revenue site and get a state and city business license, and you can start doing business. If you have a partnership, you'll need to get an employer identification number from the IRS as well. If you're a limited liability company, then you need to file articles of formation with the Washington Secretary of State, then obtain an employer identification number, and then get a state and city business license. If you're a corporation, it gets a little bit more difficult. You have to file articles articles of incorporation with the Washington Secretary of State. You'll need to get an employer identification number from the IRS, and then you'll need to get your state and city business license. Articles of incorporation require that you have a board of directors and bylaws, and so that gets a little more complex in the formation. The other thing we want to think about, and I'm sure everyone is concerned with, is taxation. Okay. And so some of these types of entities are taxed differently, and we'll go right to the limited liability company. And so in the eyes of the IRS, an LLC is what's called a disregarded entity. And that means that it's not different than you. So when you go to file your taxes, you file your personal taxes, but essentially you're filing a section in your personal taxes that reports your profit and loss from your business activities. And so in some scenarios, that could actually save you some money from your taxes, because your limited liability structure could actually divide the rental income from your business from your personal income. So it could actually turn out to be a good thing. Some positive news tonight. And so that's, again, why a lot of people choose the LLC structures, because you get the benefits of ease of management, but at the same time, you don't have to go through the process of doing double taxation. So if you're a corporation, now you're taxed twice. You're taxed on the profits of the corporation, and you're taxed on the paychecks that you pay your employees. And so when you form a corporation, you're forming a regarded entity. And that means that that is separate from you. And so now you become an employee of that corporation. And so usually the CEO. And so now you pay yourself a paycheck. And so in these types of scenarios, that's probably not the best scenario unless you have a lot of properties and you're planning on growing your business and taking investors on, because a corporate structure is the only structure that allows for passive investment. And so you can have shareholders in your business, whereas an LLC, you just have members. There's no shareholders. Any questions so far?
I see. That's right. You guys looking for more money for.
Mhm. Well, I don't get that money, so. Well, the LLC, we'll go back to the LLC filing.
Homeless people and do better services. Not just shove it into landlord hand and they don't pay. I had a recently, year and a half of not pay, and a 4 different time, so 4 different attorney, 6 time in court. You know, it's all benefit for poor people.
Yeah.
That's a year and a half of, but 4 attorney a lot of money, and a 6 time court case. Fancy, crook. That's what it is.
And I empathize with you. Yeah.
Train up for that.
So just to clarify, we're a nonprofit organization, so we're not affiliated with the city. So we don't get any of that money in the back. Oh, sorry, that gentleman right there with the hat on. So essentially, it becomes a business, and so it becomes profit of the business or revenue of the business. And one of the first things that you want to definitely double check, if you do not own if you don't own your property, if you have a mortgage on your property, then you need to go to the bank first or your lender first and ensure that you can transfer the ownership of the property from an individual into your LLC. And correct. Yeah, correct. Yeah. So that depends. And that there's a possibility that that might not be the case, but it's based on your insurance company. And so it could be a line, you could add the LLC as a line item under your current insurance. And so you wouldn't require commercial liability insurance, but it's based on your insurer. Eh, So there are a lot of different resources. And so we do have an online course that you can access at no cost. And it's called Structuring and Licensing for Startups. And basically the course is set up to take you step by step through the process of starting a limited liability company. I have some brochures back there, so I can get those to you. Yeah, so you can access that, and then we can get you a scholarship for the course. It's online, but essentially what I did is just screenshot the entire process of starting an LLC at the Secretary of State. Same with the EIN for the IRS, and same with the Department of Revenue. More questions? Okay, so let's just do a time check here. We got time. Okay, so again, coming back to the differences here. And so, I mean, the primary differences that you're looking at are your liability, the complexity of formation, and tax considerations. There's been some questions around, transferring the property to, in a case where you're, planning your estate and transferring the property to your kids or something like that. And in that sense, and setting up an LLC might make that process actually even easier because you can make them members of the LLC when you set it up. And so you could actually save some taxes there too. So there's a possibility for that. Again, this is, I would consult an attorney on all of this, of course, before doing that. Yeah, more money, sorry. So if you are going to form an LLC, you do start with the Washington Secretary of State website. You create a login, and then you go through the process of formation. It is a $200 fee to start an LLC in Washington State. And that is across the board. So any new business that starts an LLC pays the $200. It is a much easier process than you might imagine, but we do offer no-cost resources to walk people through this process, including the online course. We also offer no-cost business advising, so you can come into our office at the South Puget Sound Community College Lacey campus and sit down with someone, and they can actually help you go through this process and make sure that you're doing it correctly. Yeah. Yes. And again, you can, or if you're just you can form a sole proprietorship. And so you can just go and get a state and city business license and be on your way. But coming back to that issue of liability, $200, and versus protection from a lawsuit, there's some thoughts to be had there. The other thing that you will need to do if you do form an LLC is get an employer identification number from the IRS. If you are only one person, or you can be a single member limited liability company, or you can be a multi-member limited liability company. But if you're only one person, then you don't need to do this as long as you don't have any employees. And so you can just use your social security number. But it's nice to have that extra protection, and this doesn't cost anything. That process is quite easy also, and so we can also walk you through that process if you like. The next thing to do is go to the Department of Revenue, and this is the last step in that process. And essentially, you're getting a state and a city business license, which is the requirement for this particular situation. Coming to the ideas of insurance, I would definitely check in with your current insurance provider to see if they can add an LLC to your current insurance without having to get commercial insurance for the property. And that may be the difference in choosing to be a sole proprietor versus an LLC. Additionally, in terms of the taxes, again, the LLC is a pass-through, so it's a disregarded entity. And so with that pass-through, you're just paying you're doing your personal taxes each year, and you're using the either section C or section E to report profit and loss from business. As Christy mentioned, there is no B&O tax for long-term rentals, which is 30 days or more. Okay, this is our sort of plethora of resources, our entrepreneurial ecosystem. And so we do have resources to help with these types of things. I think the primary resources you'd be looking at here are the online courses, which you can access, or working with a business counselor one-on-one to ask more questions. And I'll open it up for questions now. That's the contact info right there. I do also have brochures in the back you can take with you. Mhm.
different ownership. That even an LLC has to pay an operating agreement, they are tax burden and the tax rate. The advantages that very big disadvantages and paying more additional.
And there could be. And so just to clarify that statement, so if you have a multi-member LLC, so if there's two people and they're not, husband and wife, then you would need an operating agreement. But for a single member LLC or for a multi-member LLC where you have, a partnership, then you don't necessarily need an operating agreement. That's not a legal requirement. Yeah. Yes, and again, we can provide you with that online course so you can, and it goes through all of the disadvantages and advantages of each of the different entities. And so you can get some information ahead of time. But, at the end of the day, it's always best to talk to an attorney or CPA or accountant. Any more questions? And I'll stick around. So if you do have individual questions, I can try to answer them and give you a brochure back there if you'd like to access some of our resources. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Sean. That's helpful food for thought. We've had some questions that we thought, they might be equipped to help you navigate. So I'm grateful that Sean can be available to go over individual questions tonight too. So now we're kind of done with the presentation portion for tonight. So we'll say goodbye to our online folks. So now this is kind of a choose your own adventure time. So I'll explain a little bit who's here to help you and what we have available for you as well. So I want to introduce Sarah Williams, who's the city's rental registry program manager. If you've worked on getting your registration done, she's likely helped you or talked to you. So both of us will be available afterward to talk with you and answer questions. And Sean will also be available for a little while to answer some questions. And then Cora and Woody can help you if you want to get the process started to register online with the city. They can walk you through step by step. And then in the back, we have a couple of opportunities to provide some input or ideas. So we have the draft inspection checklist that you can review. You can take a copy with you if you'd like. That's based on just other cities and what they have available. We can continue to refine that over this coming year. So if you have any concerns, questions, things that you want to raise to the city, feel free to write that down, add a sticky note in the back. You can write down any of those thoughts or ideas or concerns you have. And then at this other station in the back, there's an opportunity to provide some input as far as resources or things that would help you. We've heard a lot from landlords who are smaller landlords and they have difficulty keeping up with changes to the statewide landlord tenant law. They have difficulty keeping up with legal updates. So if that's the kind of information that would be helpful to you, if funding for repairs or rebates for energy efficiency like heat pumps, if those are things that would be helpful, just to kind of generate some ideas for us so that we know, what kind of information, what kind of resources, what would be helpful for you. A big part of the idea of this registry as we get things off the ground is that we can be more responsive to the needs of landlords and tenants in the community to make the situation better for everyone. So we want to try to support that. So feel free to move around and get up and have an opportunity to provide input or ideas or ask questions. I'm going to sign off for the people online, but just want to thank everyone for being here this evening and thank you for your time.